My name is Melissa, and to be honest, I've never considered my life to be anything particularly remarkable, just a stable, orderly reality where everything fits. I'm 31, a mid-level manager at a large corporation where days drag on, one after another, accompanied by the hum of air conditioners and endless meetings, and between sheets of paper, I feel like I'm gradually becoming part of the office. Just as gray, predictable, and slightly tired, but the pay is decent, and 3 years ago I was able to buy my own house, not a villa, of course, but just a neat 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood where the mornings smell of coffee and mown grass, and the neighbors greet me as if we were old acquaintances. I love this house. It's become a kind of safe haven for me, where everything is mine, the chair by the window, the old table, and the photos of my parents that I never take down from the wall. My parents are retired now, living in the suburbs and seeming to have finally learned to relax. Dad digs in the garden, Mom grows tomatoes on the balcony and complains that they're not like they were in '86. Then there's my older sister, Sarah, she's 34, and she has 3 boys, Jake, Tyler, and little Ben. Jake is 10 and already argues like an adult, Tyler is 7 and asks endless questions. And Ben just turned 5 and is still at that adorable stage when a child can burst into tears simply because the sun is shining in the wrong direction. Sarah got divorced a year ago, and frankly, no one was particularly surprised. Her and her husband's arguments had long been the backdrop to every family dinner, with everyone pretending not to hear their loud words when they started arguing over even who would wash the dishes. And before we continue, I want to thank you. I'm so glad you're watching this video on my channel. Please let me know in the comments if you remember anyone in your life when you listen to these stories, maybe yourself, maybe someone close to you, or just a moment when everything suddenly changed. Tell me the first thing that came to mind. Luckily, my ex-husband wasn't one of the worst. He pays child support regularly, and although Sarah now works part-time at some marketing agency, she's doing just fine financially. We, as a family, have always tried to stick together. My parents help when she's having difficulties, and I've been paying her $800 a month for the apartment she rents from me for a year now. It's a lot of money, but I can afford it. And frankly, I feel like it's the way it should be. Family isn't just a word, it's something like an unshakable rule that you follow even when you're tired. But there's one thing about Sarah that never ceases to disturb me, her, shall we say, very liberal views on parenting. She firmly believes that children should be given complete freedom, no boundaries, no punishments, no limits. That's how creative individuals grow up, she says, lighting a cigarette on the balcony while her sons roll around on the floor, argue over who will get the phone first, and spill juice all over the carpet. It sounds almost inspiring, but in reality, it turns their every appearance into a hurricane of screams, laughter, and destruction. Several times, I agreed to babysit the boys when Sarah had to go on business or attend meetings. Each time, the scenario repeated itself with alarming precision. She would arrive, completely in a hurry, leave them at the door with the words, "You're the best, I'll be right back," and disappear, leaving me with 3 little storms. The boys, without missing a beat, settled into the house as if it were their territory. Jake would immediately grab the remote and turn on cartoons at full volume. Tyler would run to the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge as if he were checking for an apocalypse, and Ben would start whining, demanding attention and something interesting without knowing what. I tried to set some rules, gently, calmly, explaining that they shouldn't jump on the couch in their shoes or touch my porcelain teapot, but they looked at me as if I were speaking a dead language, especially Jake, who had developed his own favorite phrase. "You can't tell us what to do," and every time I suggested they at least ask permission before taking food or toys, he would roll his eyes dramatically and whisper to his brothers, "She's just mean." Sometimes they even threatened to tell my mother that I was scolding them, and then I felt like a school teacher on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The turning point came the day I agreed to babysit them, unaware it would be my last. Sarah arrived around noon, smiling as if nothing in the world could go wrong, and said she had important meetings but would be back by 5. I waved as she watched her car disappear around the corner, and literally a second later the house was filled with sounds, squeals, footsteps, laughter, slamming doors. Jake, as usual, occupied the TV. Tyler raided my kitchen, opening every cabinet in sight, and Ben wandered around the room with a disgruntled expression, claiming he's bored and there's nothing interesting here. I was just about to pour myself a coffee when I heard the clink of ceramics. Tyler was standing in the middle of the living room, holding the very vase I'd bought in Italy, in a small shop in Siena, where the air smelled of basil and the sea. It wasn't expensive, but I treasured it, simple, with beige lines, slightly uneven, as if the master's breath had lingered in it, and the moment he tossed it into the air, laughing and shouting that it looks like a ball, I felt my chest tighten, as if the seconds stretched into eternity, and I only managed to utter, "Tyler, don't you dare." He stood in the middle of the living room, smiling that brazen, challenging smile with which children seem to test the limits of adults' patience, and I realized that everything was already going downhill. Tyler began tossing the ball higher and higher, as if deliberately testing the limits of my composure, and the ball whistled in arcs between the lamp and the ceiling, while I repeated in an even voice, "Tyler, take it outside, please. Right now." He just smirked, as if it were a game, as if I were participating in some absurd competition where the prize was my composure. Ben, of course, was hooked on the laughter and, not to be outdone, grabbed one of my throw pillows, the one with the lavender embroidery I'd once bought at the Santa Fe Fair, and started throwing it at the ceiling, laughing. A second later, the entire living room became an arena, with 3 boys running, squealing, and throwing things, as if trying to prove that chaos is just a form of fun. I tried to stop them, clapping my hands and raising my voice, but they didn't hear me. Their laughter had become thick, like the sound of rain on a roof, and I couldn't even hear my own words until what I dreaded most happened. Tyler threw the ball toward Ben, but he missed it, and it bounced off the coffee table and into a vase. In a split second, the air was filled with a crystal crack, as if something living had cracked from within, and I saw my little Italian souvenir shatter into dozens of pieces scattered across the floor, glistening in the sunlight like fragments of a shattered memory. I stood there in disbelief, and the boys, frozen, silently watched this silent crime, as if trying to comprehend what had happened. Jake spoke first. He shrugged, as if it were nothing, and lazily said, "Oops, that was the last straw." I felt anger boiling within me, heavy but cold, like boiling water in a kettle, and I said slowly, clearly, so that every word carried weight, "All 3 of you, on the couch, now." They exchanged glances, as if they didn't believe I was serious, but my tone must have done the trick, because Jake wordlessly turned off the TV. Tyler stood with the ball in his hands, and Ben, frowning, sat down. First, as if testing whether I really intended to deprive them of their usual freedom. "What are you doing?" Tyler asked, looking at me defiantly. I took a breath, trying not to lose my temper, and replied, "I set boundaries in my own home." They exchanged glances, and I continued, feeling each word burn the air. "You just broke something that belonged to me. In my house, when someone breaks something, they sit down and silently ponder what they did wrong. No TV, no games, just sit and wait for your mother to come home." Ben started to get up, but I calmly gestured to the couch, and he sat back down, pursing his lips, staring at the floor. For the next 3 hours, a silence reigned in my house unlike anything I'd ever heard, only the sound of a broom sweeping up broken glass and the occasional cough from the boys, who seemed uncomfortable. I picked up the broken pieces, feeling a weariness deep in my soul, not physical, but the kind that comes when you realize you're doing good and receiving chaos in return. When there was a knock on the door, the clock hands were exactly 5 o'clock. Sarah stormed in, bright, confident, smelling of expensive perfume, and before she could look around, the 3 boys rushed toward her, interrupting each other as if competing to see who could complain the fastest. "Mom, she made us sit still." Tyler complained, "She didn't let us watch TV." Jake shouted, "And she yelled at us." Ben added, "As if I'd been keeping them on bread and water." Sarah flushed, her lips pressed together, and her gaze took on a look like I'd just kicked a puppy. "How dare you treat my children like that," she said, her voice shaking not with anger but with self-righteousness. "You had no right to punish them, they're just children, Melissa." I silently pointed to the trash can where the shards of a vase lay, a testament to the day's events. "They broke this after I asked them to stop throwing things in the living room," I said quietly. Sarah crossed her arms. "It was an accident. You're being cruel over a stupid vase, cruel, Melissa." I felt something snap inside me, all my patience, all my restraint, all the weariness of these years with its endless requests and accusations suddenly poured out in a voice that sounded firmer than I expected. "Sarah, they destroyed my home while you were gone. I asked them nicely, but they wouldn't listen. What was I supposed to do? Just let them destroy everything I have? She shook her head and said her favorite phrase, one she seemed to have learned from a parenting blog. You should have let them be themselves. That's why kids grow up repressed and afraid to express their creativity. You just don't understand weird kids. The word cruelty stuck somewhere inside me like a splinter, and I realized I couldn't forget it. After all, I'd spent all day cleaning up after her children, putting up with their noise, their screams, their chaos, and trying to be the understanding aunt she boasted to her friends, but apparently, a basic desire for respect in my own home was now called cruelty. I exhaled and said, okay, if that's what you think, then perhaps your boys are strangers to me, just like you said, and strangers shouldn't come into my house and break my things. Find someone else to watch them when you need help. Sarah didn't answer. She just grabbed their jackets and started pulling them on, muttering something under her breath about how unbearable I was, how I always made a mountain out of a molehill. I stood by the window and watched them leave, the door slamming, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the same echoing silence, filled with everything I hadn't said. She didn't even say goodbye when she left. She simply yanked the door open, causing the air in the hallway to shake, and the next moment there was a dull thud, and the house was mine again. Finally, after weeks of irritation, arguments, children's squeals, and crumbs underfoot, there was a silence like only after thunder. I remember standing by the window, looking out at the street where the car had slammed shut behind her, and thinking that maybe this is what true freedom is, when no one drops things, argues, demands, or touches yours. After that argument, I was sure I was finally free of chaos, and frankly, the feeling was almost physical, like taking off a heavy coat soaked in the rain. I no longer had to babysit the children, wipe their muddy shoes off the floor, fix broken things, and pretend I wasn't offended. 2 weeks passed in pure bliss. I would return home after work and for the first time in a long time, feel like I was truly exhaling. The house was clean. A quality I no longer took for granted. I could watch anything on TV without being yelled at. I'm bored, or give me cartoons, and simply sit on the couch with a cup of tea, unafraid that someone would knock over the sugar bowl. But Saturday arrived anyway, as always, and with it came a reminder that the perfect silence in my life could still be broken. On Saturdays, I went to my parents' house for dinner, an old family tradition, as steadfast as the smell of turkey in their house or the wall clock that timed our conversations. But lately, these evenings had become more like a test of patience. Now the chaos had moved in with them. As soon as we all gathered around the table, the boys turned an ordinary dinner into something resembling a circus performance. They interrupted the adults, threw pieces of food at each other, spilled juice, while my mother, trying to save face, helplessly wiped the tablecloth. Meanwhile, Sarah sat with her phone glued to the screen, smiling at someone on a messenger, as if she were in another world where clammy fingers, shouting, and irritated adults didn't exist. Every time I asked her to at least correct the children, she wouldn't look up and would say dryly, "It's none of your business, Melissa." My parents tried to remain calm, but I could see my mother's hands shaking as she put the kettle on the stove, and my father simply averted his eyes, as if hoping it would all go away on its own. After every dinner, Sarah would gather the boys, barely looking at us, and leaving behind a scene of devastation, food on the floor, overturned chairs, sticky marks on the cabinets, and then my mother would ask me to stay and help. We would silently pick up the remains of the food, swipe crumbs, wipe greasy marks from the dishes, and I could feel the light drain from my parents' eyes. It was hard for them, but they loved Sarah too much to admit it. This went on almost every Saturday, and with each passing week, I felt the weariness building within me. I was gnawed by a sense of injustice, and no matter what I did, it didn't make it any easier. I didn't know how to stop it all. After all, family, no matter how you look at it, isn't something you can put aside. As November arrived, the air began to smell of chill and baked apples, and I suddenly realized Thanksgiving was approaching. I usually looked forward to the holiday with a warm anticipation, the smell of roasting turkey, the chatter around the long table, old family stories. But this year, the mere thought of spending the day in the usual chaos filled me with a sickening feeling. I imagined Ben spilling cranberry sauce on Mom's tablecloth, Sarah remaining silent again, Dad and I cleaning up after the kids, and it suddenly clicked inside me, I didn't have to do this again. And so an idea was born: what if I just didn't go this year? What if I hosted my own dinner, a quiet one, without the squeals of children, without the constant screams and dropped spoons? I dialed Mom's number, my fingers trembling, as if I was about to announce something out of the ordinary. "Mom, I'm not coming to dinner this year," I said, trying to sound calm. "What do you mean, you're not coming?" She clearly didn't expect it. "It's Thanksgiving, we always spend it together." "I know, Mom, it's just that this year I want to have my own dinner, at my own place." There was a pause. Moms don't have those pauses unless they're trying to process something. Then quietly, "Melissa, is it because of Sarah and the boys?" I couldn't lie. "Partly, yes, I just want to have a peaceful holiday for once, no yelling, no cleaning until midnight." She sighed. I didn't hear judgment in that sigh, but rather a kind of relief. "I understand, honey, and I really do understand." After that conversation, I felt as if another layer of fatigue had been lifted. I pulled out my list of relatives: Aunt Linda, Uncle George, Cousin Ellen, and about a dozen others who usually gathered at my parents', and started calling them. I spoke confidently, even a little cheerfully. "This year I'm having a small dinner, more intimate than usual, but with one condition: no children under 15 allowed." Aunt Linda laughed. "Oh, an adults-only party?" "Yes," I replied, smiling for the first time in a long time, "a party where we can talk without shouting over each other, more sophisticated, just an evening where we can be adults, not nurses at a kindergarten." I heard approval in her voice, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was doing something not out of politeness, not out of a sense of duty, but because I wanted to feel like a person again, choosing how to live, not just enduring. Most of my relatives greeted my idea with such enthusiasm, as if I'd just announced the abolition of aging. My Uncle Mike burst out laughing when I mentioned the party would be adults only. "Finally," he said, wiping away tears of laughter, "I love kids. But sometimes you just want to eat without interrupting, without swatting a spoon in your face, or running for napkins." His laughter was infectious, and I found myself smiling wider than I had in a month. Aunt Carol was even more enthusiastic. "Thank goodness," she practically shouted when I explained the idea. "I adore your nephews, truly, but after an hour with them, my nerves are jittery, and a whole holiday dinner is torture. I've long dreamed of a quiet party where we can talk without having to talk over the kids." A few days later, I had confirmation from 8 relatives. All of them responded with joy. It seemed like each of them was dreaming of this grown-up, civilized Thanksgiving, where they could wear nice clothes and not worry about someone spilling juice on the tablecloth. The atmosphere in our conversations was almost conspiratorial, as if we were launching a small rebellion against the family chaos. On Wednesday, the day before the holiday, I stood in the kitchen planning the menu, feeling like the mistress of my own life, finally in control of my cozy kingdom. As I was stirring the stuffing, my phone vibrated. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. It was the first message from her since she slammed the door. "Hi, Mom said you're not coming tomorrow. Why are you celebrating separately?" I froze, staring at the screen, as if it reflected not just her question but the entire gulf between us. For a few minutes, I considered how honestly I should answer, then I decided, enough evasiveness. "This year I'm hosting my own dinner. I want a child-free holiday, calm, without scenes or shouting, just a quiet Thanksgiving for adults." I pressed send and stared at the screen, where 3 blinking dots appeared, then they disappeared, then they appeared again. This went on for about 10 minutes. Sarah was clearly typing, erasing, typing again, and finally, briefly, "You're terrible, you don't want to see your nephews on Thanksgiving." I immediately replied, "Nothing personal, Sarah, I just want to have a peaceful holiday, without drama and without badly behaved children." The 3 dots flashed once more, then vanished forever. Message read, "Silence." I left the phone on the table, feeling both relief and a hint of guilt growing in my chest. It was true, but truth is rarely greeted with gratitude. An hour passed waiting for a response, but there was none, and, as strange as it might sound, I knew Sarah's silence was also an answer. She understood everything. On Thursday morning, I woke up with a lightness I hadn't felt in probably 10 years. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee. I sent my parents and Sarah a message in the family chat. "Happy Thanksgiving. Love you." Mom responded immediately, hearts, a turkey, lots of emojis. Dad added, "We're so proud of you, honey." Sarah left me there. I didn't let that little detail spoil the day. I turned on some music, old jazz, the kind I've always associated with comfort, and started cooking, the house filled with the aroma of garlic, roasting vegetables, and butter. I took the china out of the cabinet that had been gathering dust since I bought the house, set out candles, laid out napkins with gold rings, and placed an arrangement of autumn leaves, pumpkins, and dried flowers in the center of the table. When I stepped back to take in the whole scene, it felt like I'd stepped into a magazine about the beautiful life, only this time that life was mine. The first guests began arriving around 2 o'clock. Uncle Mike walked in, smiling, holding a bottle of wine, and loudly announced, "Now, to make the holiday even more grown-up." Aunt Linda followed with her legendary stuffing, scented with sage and onion, and my cousin David handed me a bouquet of chrysanthemums. "To highlight your autumn beauty," he said, and I just laughed. The house came alive, everyone was in a wonderful mood, easygoing, without pretense. We talked about work, about movies, about dream destinations. No one interrupted, no one shouted, no one spilled drinks on the tablecloth. It was a real adult holiday, calm, kind, with the taste of wine and the sound of laughter unmuffled by the squeals of children. When I placed the turkey on the table, warm, golden, perfectly roasted, I felt as if the world had finally become what I always wanted it to be: manageable, harmonious, predictable. And at that very moment the doorbell rang. I froze. All the guests were already here. I wasn't expecting anyone else. For a second, I thought maybe a neighbor had brought the mail, or the courier had gotten the wrong address, but for some reason, a premonition stabbed at my heart, as if something stood on the threshold that could once again destroy my hard-won peace. I opened the door, and at that moment, the air seemed to thicken. The world froze for a second as my consciousness tried to catch up with my eyes. Sarah stood there, well-groomed, self-assured, with that dazzling smile she usually used to cover up any guilt. Next to her stood 3 boys in matching sweatshirts and sneakers, shifting from foot to foot but beaming as if they were about to present me with an award for the best dinner of the year. "Surprise!" they shouted in unison, and before I could say anything, this noisy, joyful tsunami had already pushed past me and into the house, leaving behind the scent of cold air and vanilla baby shampoo. I stood motionless, as if nailed to the floor. Everything I'd meticulously planned, every element of my grown-up celebration, the candles, the china, the glasses, the perfectly polished table, in a matter of seconds had become a backdrop for the chaos I'd so longed to leave behind. Sarah, as if nothing had happened, strode straight into the dining room with the confident gait of a hostess and plopped down in my chair at the head of the table. Yes, the very same one where I'd been sitting just a moment ago, finally feeling in control of my life. "Hello everyone," she announced loudly, looking around at her confused guests. "Sorry, we're a little late." Her boys didn't waste a second. Jake had already grabbed a bun, Tyler was digging into a bowl of stuffing, and Ben, as content as a cat after a hunt, had settled right on the living room carpet, clutching a turkey leg. Not a single plate, not a single napkin. Everything I'd prepared with love and patience vanished beneath their sticky fingers, turning into shapeless lumps of food. And then, like the final chord of this catastrophe, I heard the sharp click of the remote, and a second later the walls of my house shook from the blare of a cartoon, which someone had turned up to maximum volume. Tyler sat on the couch, staring at the screen as if at a church altar, while the speakers blasted squeals, laughter, and music that literally knocked all words out of the air. My relatives exchanged horrified glances. Aunt Linda tried to force a polite smile, but it looked like a spasm. Uncle Mike shook his head and looked at me with an expression as if to say, "Come on, Melissa, do something." My cousin David, hugging his elderly mother, quietly said, "Mom seems to have a headache, we think we'll go." "Oh, don't leave because of us," Sarah cried cheerfully, unaware that everyone at the table had turned pale. "The children are just happy to be here." But Aunt Carol was already throwing on her coat, buttoning it with trembling fingers. "Sorry, dear," she whispered, "but it's too loud, my ears are ringing." She nodded pityingly at me and, without looking at Sarah, left the house. A commotion followed, someone clearing a plate, someone picking up a purse, someone looking for an excuse to escape. I felt anger boiling within me, so pure, so burning, that my hands began to shake. I walked up to Sarah, grabbed her arm, pulled her out of her chair, and hissed, "Into the kitchen." She looked surprised, as if I'd just violated some kind of decorum. I dragged her along, closed the door, and, trying not to yell, said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I made it clear, this is an adults-only party. Her eyes widened, and her lips formed a falsely innocent smile that took my breath away. "The boys were so excited to see you for Thanksgiving," she said softly. "I thought they'd love to surprise you." Before I could respond, a dull thud erupted from the living room, followed by a tinkling sound like glass breaking, and a muffled cry. We both fled the kitchen. I froze when I saw my new TV, the very same 65-inch one I'd been saving up for almost 6 months, was now crisscrossed by a massive crack, extending from corner to corner like lightning across the sky. The screen was dead. Tyler stood in the middle of the room, his arms hanging down, the remote lying next to him. Jake and Ben sat on the couch, staring at the floor, and even the cartoon had frozen in a silent parody of joy. "Who did this?" I asked quietly, but my voice cut through the air. Silence. And then Uncle Mike cleared his throat, looked up, and said, "It was Tyler." His brother changed the channel, and he dropped the remote. The world swam. I literally felt the tremors rising from my fingers to my throat, and the words came out hoarsely, as if someone were squeezing my chest. "Sarah, your son just broke my TV. It cost $2,000. You must return this money to me." My guest, my sister, my once close friend, she stood before me with the same expression on her face that children look at adults when they are first asked to bear the consequences. Only this wasn't a girl, but a grown woman who simply didn't know what responsibility was. Sarah stared at the cracked screen, as if trying to comprehend how the object that had just moments ago reflected cartoons and the chaos of her children had suddenly become a silent reminder of permissiveness. When her gaze slid back to me, there was no shame in her eyes, only a hint of irritation, as if I'd ruined the evening with my indignation. And then she laughed, a laughter that sounded harsh, cold, like glass cracking under a heel. "Are you serious, Melissa?" she said, waving it off, as if I'd asked her not for money but for something trivial. "It was just an accident. Kids break things. It's normal. Calm down. It's not the end of the world." I felt something inside me finally snap at those words, as if years of restraint, good manners, and the ability to smile through hurt feelings had suddenly evaporated. I stood there, looking at her, every breath a labored effort, because I knew I couldn't take it anymore. "Sarah," I said slowly, trying not to scream, "take the kids and get out of my house, now." She froze, as if she hadn't expected to hear me say that. Then something in my face must have convinced her I wasn't joking, because she stood up abruptly and started gathering the boys' things, muttering loudly under her breath something like "crazy and always has her own rules." The kids started whining about not wanting to leave, about not finishing their food, about the cartoon only just starting, but Sarah didn't argue. For the first time all evening, she simply pulled their jackets over them, pushed them toward the door, and turned around as soon as she was at the threshold. "That's exactly why no one likes you," she screamed, her voice ringing like a broken string. "You're mean, selfish, and you hate children." The door slammed shut, and the house was once again plunged into silence, so thick I could hear my own breathing. My remaining guests stood motionless, as if afraid to even move. Then Uncle Mike coughed, shrugged, and said, "Well, at least it was fun." His wife looked at him as if she were ready to stab him in the hand with her fork, but no one laughed. One by one, the relatives began apologizing, saying they had to go, that they didn't want to disturb, that the party had apparently been a bit off. I nodded, trying to look calm, but my hands were shaking, and I couldn't even hold a plate properly. An hour later, the house was empty. My perfect Thanksgiving dinner ended in a way no one could have imagined, not even in a bad comedy. I stood amid strewn buns, spilled wine, and pie crumbs, staring at the black, dead TV screen that had symbolized my small success that morning. I spent the rest of the evening on my knees, cleaning up the mess, pressing my lips together to keep from bursting into angry tears. I mopped up dried gravy from the table, picked up greasy stains from the carpet, and thought only of one number: $2,000, a TV that was only 6 weeks old. 6. The next day, still feeling bitter, I went to my parents' house. Their house smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and for almost a second I felt relief, until I walked into the kitchen and realized from their expressions that they already knew. "Sarah told us about the TV," my mother said quietly, looking into her teacup, as if there was some excuse there. "She mentioned that Tyler accidentally dropped the remote." "Accidentally?" I almost laughed. Mom, he threw it because my brother changed the channel. Dad exchanged that look with Mom that couples exchange after 40 years of marriage, where one silent movement can mean an entire conversation. She said it was an accident, he added calmly. Even so, I replied, feeling my voice grow hoarse, she has to pay, it's her child, it's her responsibility. Mom shook her head and said softly, Melissa, you know Sarah doesn't have that kind of money, maybe you should just forget about it? It's just a thing. I froze. Forget it? I repeated, Mom, it's $2,000. She sighed and said, I know, but family is more important, don't ruin your relationship over this. I looked at them and felt an icy gulf growing between us. I left them in complete silence, crushed by the fact that even my parents, the people who had always taught me fairness, now excused someone else's irresponsibility simply because it was family. That evening, I sat in the living room, staring at the broken television reflecting my own face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely alone, and in that silence, I made a decision. If no one was going to hold Sarah accountable, I would do it my way. I decided that this Christmas and next, I would give nothing to her or her sons, no toys, no gift certificates, not even the chocolate boxes I always ordered in advance. I usually spent $300 on them each year. Over 2 years, that would be $2,400, a little more than my television cost. The symmetry, I thought, was strange, but fair. I didn't tell anyone about my decision. I simply ordered a new television, chose an upgrade over the old one, and got busy. Preparing for Christmas, the weeks leading up to the holiday passed peacefully. For the first time in a long time, I bought my dad the leather watch he'd been dreaming of, and my mom some jewelry she'd once seen in a jewelry store window. I decided to stop by for a quick visit, drop off the gifts, and leave before the usual family chaos set in, which now seemed distant, almost alien. I knocked on my parents' door around 6 in the evening, and when my mom opened the door, she was wearing an apron embroidered with a Christmas flower, her cheeks pink from the heat of the oven. The house smelled of cinnamon, butter, and that special warmth you only feel in December, when it's cold outside and everything inside is softly glowing with fairy lights. She smiled broadly, as if she'd momentarily forgotten the cold wall between us for the past few months, and said, Melissa, I'm so glad you stopped by. And, without even giving me a chance to respond, she hugged me tightly, like in childhood, when everything still seemed simple. Come in, darling, come in, we just finished frosting the cookies. I stepped inside and immediately heard chaos, that same familiar noise that had become a constant backdrop to all family gatherings over the past few years. Shouts, squeals, the crash of something falling, someone's laughter, footsteps, stomping on the floor. As if a small storm had settled in the house, and I knew, Sarah was already here. Of course she was here. I leaned toward Mom and said quietly, trying not to betray the irritation in my voice, I can't stay long, I just wanted to give you and Dad your presents. We went into the kitchen, and I inhaled the scent of freshly baked goods with relief, but even from here, through the open door, the hum of the living room drifted in. Life there was going on according to its own rules, without the slightest trace of discipline. I glanced in and saw the familiar scene, 3 boys racing around the coffee table, knocking over everything in their path, as if it were an obstacle course, while Sarah, her head glued to her phone, sat in her father's chair, the very one he always considered his own. Her face was illuminated by the bluish light of the screen, and she looked as if this evening had nothing to do with her. Jake was taking down the ornaments from the Christmas tree, carefully twirling them in his hands, seemingly searching for which ones he could spin. Tyler was jumping on the couch, throwing pillows onto the floor, and little Ben was sitting in the corner, bawling, either out of frustration or simply because he could. I gave my parents their presents, beautiful, carefully ribboned boxes, filled with more thought and warmth than I'd poured into anything in a long time. I was about to leave quietly before Sarah noticed I was there, but fate, as always, had its own plans. 3 boys burst into the kitchen, flushed and out of breath, as if I were the center of the party. Aunt Melissa! Jake shouted, his eyes shining with anticipation, where are our presents? Yeah, where are our Christmas presents? Tyler chimed in, now with a hint of the demandingness he seemed to have inherited from his mother. And Ben simply stood there, eyes wide, arms outstretched, as if he was absolutely certain I was about to pull something magical out of my bag. And then the moment I'd been playing out in my head for weeks finally arrived. Mom and Dad were also looking at me with anticipation, as if this was some kind of ritual, and I knew that what I said would change not only this evening, but perhaps everything between us. I looked at the boys, then across the kitchen to where Sarah sat, still on her phone, and said evenly, loud enough for her to hear, "This year, and next year, I'm not giving you any Christmas presents." They blinked almost simultaneously, as if they hadn't immediately understood. I continued, without changing my tone, "I'm using this money to recoup the cost of the TV you broke on Thanksgiving." The reaction was immediate. Ben held as if I'd announced the end of the world, fell to the floor, and started kicking his legs, while Jake stood there with his mouth open, unable to believe I'd dared to say that out loud. Tyler rushed towards Sarah, screaming, "Mom! Aunt Melissa says she's not giving us anything for Christmas." Sarah jumped up as if stung and practically flew into the kitchen. Her face was scarlet with rage, her eyes blazing. You're a monster," she cried, her voice shaking. "You're vindictive, mean, cruel. They're children, Melissa." I stood straight, keeping my composure, though inside I was seething. "These are children," I said slowly, "who destroyed my property, and their mother refused to take the slightest responsibility for it. You're punishing innocent children because of a TV." Sarah nearly screamed, clutching at the air as if looking for something to throw at me. "What kind of person does this? You're the worst sister anyone could have." I exhaled and replied quietly, calmly, which seemed to anger her even more, "The only one behaving terribly is you, Sarah. You don't teach your children to respect other people's work, other people's things, other people's space. You don't show them that there are consequences for their actions, so today, I'm doing this for you." Sarah turned to her parents, as if seeking support, and blurted out, "Do you hear me? Are you going to let her talk to me like that?" Mom and Dad exchanged glances, but no one said a word. They looked embarrassed, as if hoping the scene would resolve itself. But in their silence, I sensed weariness, the same weariness that builds over years of putting up with a mess that can't be fixed. "Okay," Sarah finally spat, grabbing Ben's hand, "we're leaving, and don't wait for us again." She led the sobbing children after her, and I stood motionless, listening to their footsteps pound the floor, the door slam, and the Christmas wreath fall from its hook and softly hit the floor. The house was once again plunged into silence, but this time it was different, not heavy, not awkward, but somehow cleansing, as if the air had become clear for the first time in years. I walked home in a rare December rain, fog casting a soft amber glow over the streetlights, and my footsteps echoed loudly in the quiet street, as if I were returning not just to a home but to a new life, one where I no longer had to guess Sarah's mood or fear that another encounter would turn into a storm. My apartment was quiet, and, barely undressed, I ordered Chinese food, the same one with sweet duck and sticky rice that I'd always wanted to try but somehow hadn't allowed myself before. As if it were selfish, while I waited, I lit candles, turned on an old movie about people loving each other without constant complaints or broken televisions, and, leaning back on the pillow, I suddenly felt that for the first time in many years, I didn't have to make peace with anyone, or explain myself, or choose my words carefully lest I offend. I sent my friends short Christmas greetings, received a couple of replies, and my soul felt calm, as if all this chaos, all this drama had finally retreated to where it belonged, into the past. 2 days later, idly scrolling through my Facebook feed, I came across a photo that made my heart clench not with pain, but with pure, icy rage. 3 boys, my nephews, crying, their eyes red, tears smeared across their cheeks, and beneath the photo, a long, carefully written caption about how cruel and vindictive I was, about how heartless Aunt Melissa deprived innocent children of Christmas presents. Sarah wrote that she was ashamed to have such a sister and that she wanted nothing more to do with me. Dozens of comments followed. People I'd never met called me a monster, said only cold, lonely women with no family act like that, and Sarah liked every insult, as if signing a guilty verdict. I was about to write a reply, a post explaining everything from start to finish, about the TV, about Thanksgiving, about her laughter as the screen cracked beneath the remote. My fingers pounded the keyboard fast and angrily, the words flying like stones, but then I suddenly stopped, and, staring at the blinking cursor for a long moment, I felt it was all pointless. Those who knew the truth already knew it, and those who chose to believe Sarah, let them continue believing. I didn't want to waste my life on this anymore. I highlighted the entire text, hit delete, and before doubt could whisper something like, maybe after all, I sent Sarah a private message. If you no longer consider me your sister, perhaps I'll stop paying your rent. After all, why spend $800 a month on someone who, in his own words, is no longer my family? The answer came instantly. My phone vibrated, her name lit up the screen, and she called and called and called, as if she could break through the silence with persistence, 12 times in a row. Then the messages started pouring in. Melissa, please don't do this, I didn't mean what I said, I was just angry, the kids need a place to live. I stared at the screen and didn't respond. An hour later, out of pure curiosity, I checked her page. The post in which she'd painted me as a monster was gone, completely, as if it had never existed. Later, she wrote another message. Please don't stop paying rent, I can't afford this apartment without your help. And again, I didn't respond. 2 months passed, I continued paying rent, even though every time I transferred money, something inside me stubbornly whispered that I was making a mistake. But I couldn't bear the thought of the boys being left homeless. They were children, spoiled though they were, but not to blame for their mother's endless chaos. I stopped talking to her, visiting my parents' house only when I knew Sarah wasn't there, arriving in the evenings when the children had school the next day, and only then did I allow myself to relax, have tea with Mom, or talk to Dad about something simple. Last week, during one of these visits, Mom, slicing a pie, said almost casually, but I noticed a glimmer of hope in her voice, Sarah seems to be trying, she's working with the boys. Last Saturday, they stayed through dinner, didn't throw food, and even helped clear the table. Dad nodded, adding that for the first time in years, he didn't have to hide the china plates. Maybe your strict boundaries taught her something. Mom said softly, perhaps she finally realized that being a parent isn't a perpetual indulgence, but a responsibility. She looked at me with the same expression I'd known since childhood, when my mother tried to gently suggest reconciliation without saying it outright. Maybe we should give her a chance, she said. Maybe it would be good for the boys to see that even after fights, family can still be there. I was silent for a long time, feeling anger and weariness collide in my chest. I knew my mother was speaking kindly, but I couldn't just erase everything the way Sarah had with her post. I'm not ready, I said quietly. I want to see real, lasting change, not a couple of polite dinners. I need to know this isn't some kind of apology show. My mother nodded, as if she understood. When I returned home that evening, the lights of the neighboring house were reflected in the window. The same Chinese noodle box I hadn't finished on Christmas Day sat on the windowsill, and I suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not victory, not being right, just peace, and that was far more valuable than any TV, any dinner, any pretense of family warmth.